Welcome to the Pro Social Podcast, brought to you by Pro Social Workers, where we humanize differences, advance viewpoint diversity, and disagree constructively. In a divided world, we reject ideological orthodoxy and instead embrace constructive disagreement and adversarial collaboration, because better ideas emerge when different perspectives engage with dignity and respect. Our goal isn't to tell you what to think, but to help you think well. Join us as we work to depolarize discourse and build a more thoughtful, peaceful, pluralistic society. This is the Pro Social Podcast.
Welcome to the Pro Social Podcast, sponsored by Pro Social Workers. I'm Matt Watson, the Executive Director and co-founder of Pro Social Workers. I'm joined today by my co-founder, Xander Kaeg, the NASW 2020 Social Worker of the Year. And we're going to talk today a little bit about consensus organizing, and we're excited to share this with you. Consensus organizing is at the heart of what we've been doing within Pro Social Workers, and I didn't even know it. Xander has much more experience with consensus organizing, as it was part of his Master's of Social Work Education, and he is much more familiar with it. And so we're going to give Xander a little bit of time to introduce this to us, and then we'll share with you some additional experiences that others have had with consensus organizing.
Thanks, Matt. Absolutely. I'm really excited to not only talk about consensus organizing, but to have Michael or Mike Eichler, Professor Eichler, as I like to call him, on the show today. So consensus organizing, you're going to hear a lot more from Professor Eichler about how he developed the model, but let's just go into a little bit of detail about what it is. So it's a collaborative community model. It emphasizes collaboration, relationship building, sustainable social change in communities in particular. Also about shared goals and partnerships. And that's different, right? And you'll hear how it's different from the other form of community organizing called conflict-based. Because in consensus organizing, it brings together residents, institutions, organizations all together. So the people that others might consider the enemy or the people that we want to tear down. In consensus organizing, we bring everybody together to solve the issue or the problem at hand in our communities, in our workplace, and in some cases in our families. Consensus organizing, the model can be applied in micro, meso, and macro ways. It's a really beautiful model for not just organizing in communities, but for organizing in our lives. There's a long-term focus. So people are coming together, they're cooperating. And the idea is that the goal is to go beyond the initial issue or project or task that was being worked on, wanting things to go beyond that level. It also empowers marginalized communities. Oftentimes, people go into the community, they want to organize around something, and they're focused on the marginalized members of a community. But that's not always the outcome of what happens in the community. So the consensus model is around empowering marginalized community because it expands community power. It doesn't try to usurp power or to turn the tables on power. It brings in the notion of shared power with the individuals in the community, with those who have the resources and also the influence around decision making. So that's a quick introduction to the model. And here are some of the core principles. So when Professor Eichler is talking, he's going to be referring to these principles, but maybe not in that specific way. So let's go over what these principles are so that as you're listening along, you might be able to identify them through his stories. So the first is mutual self-interest. And so the idea is that engagement arises when individuals and institutions can see the clear benefit for themselves. It's not working against the grain of people being self-interested and companies being self-interested and communities or neighborhoods being self-interested. It's just worked into the fabric of the model. It's also about relationship building, right? That's one of the core principles, to establish trust and to sustain those personal connections because they're seen as strategic. The individuals that you're connecting with are strategic assets that are crucial for that organizing that you're going to be working on, or the project that you're going to be working on, right? So building relationships with all of the individuals involved, the stakeholders, some might say. So this inclusion of power holders, this goes back to that shared example of power, that the power holders, the people who run the business, the people who are in charge of the city government, the labor organizers, everybody is brought together and they're included and they're partnering with each other. They're collaborating together, right? And so it's not about building conflict and having an adversary. We might feel in the beginning that we don't have anything in common, but we soon find out that we have a lot in common, and that we can work together with this model. The asset-based perspective principle is recognizing that the community has strengths, that there's social or human capital, that there are skills that individuals in the community have that can be utilized and mobilized as part of the change that we're seeking or you're seeking. And then finally, the last core principle is empowerment through partnerships, right? When we empower communities to connect with all of those external resources that exist, but we maintain a really clear voice on what our goals are in a neighborhood, in a company, in a school. When we're able to do that, we empower everybody. Everybody gets their needs met. Everybody makes money. The neighborhood improves for everybody. So these are the core principles of the model. And when you're listening to Professor Eichler telling stories, you'll see where this emerges, even though he might not specifically refer to that core principle. So consensus organizing was developed in direct, not opposition to, that wouldn't be correct, but as you'll learn, Professor Eichler was a student of Saul Alinsky, and was trained in the conflict-based organizing model and spent a lot of time out in the communities that he was working, applying the conflict-based model, and started to notice that he was running into issues with it, sort of working, but not really working. You'll understand what I mean when you hear the stories. So what are some of the differences then between the consensus model of organizing and the conflict model of organizing? So conflict organizing uses pressure and confrontation because the goal is to force the change, right? To identify who the power holders are, to personalize your fight, and then to win at all cost. And this unfortunately yields very short-term results, and it has no systemic change. It might fix one neighborhood, but it doesn't do any good for the neighborhoods around it, right? It might fix a city, but not the state, but not the country. It's very short-term, and it doesn't have systemic change that it leaves behind. In the consensus approach, then, the difference would be that the priorities are around cooperation, right? That shared power, bringing everybody to the table. When you do that, you end up having more long-term engagement from the people involved and the others who come on as time goes by, who learn about it and want to engage, right? Because there's multiple stakeholders that are involved in this. And the idea is that we're solving a problem, again, in our community, in our place of work, in our family, but we're doing it collaboratively. We're not pitting ourselves against the adversary, right? Against the powerful or the owners. We're not doing that in consensus organizing. We're bringing everybody to the table, even though there may be really stark differences in our opinions about things, politics, and in our values even. Or maybe not in our values, but in how what the means with which we seek those values out in the world. But when we come together and we share that experience, then we can come to a place of working as a group and not against anybody else, not wanting to topple down power. When there are issues in the consensus organizing model where there isn't buy-in, right? People aren't willing to come to the table. And you're going to hear a really good example of how Professor Eichler used this strategic use of conflict when trying to get a casino owner, to come in on a project. So consensus organizing model uses conflict, but very strategically as a tool in a full toolbox of many other tools that can be used. But the emphasis when using conflict in the consensus model is on sustained solution and stakeholder investment. It's not about forcing change and putting pressure on people and confronting them. So that's the difference between the consensus organizing and conflict organizing models. And that's not to say that there isn't or won't be an opportunity to utilize a little bit of conflict strategically. It doesn't mean that you're switching from the consensus model to the conflict model when you use conflict to get to those sustained solutions. So let's just go ahead and listen to Professor Eichler tell you a little bit more about himself and also the work that he's been doing for many, many years. And I hope you are as inspired as I have been when I took 3 consensus organizing classes in my MSW program at San Diego State University, which is where the Consensus Organizing Institute is housed. The Professor Eichler started and was running at the time that I was a student at the school, and learned all about these principles.
Thanks, Xander. Consensus organizing prioritizes the social, puts the social into social work. It's really the heart of what we're trying to do as well. There's a lot of parallels. You'll see that in our work as well. Thank you very much for the introduction. Now we hope you enjoy the rest of our podcast with Mike Eichler.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Pro Social Podcast, brought to you by Pro Social Workers, where we seek to humanize, we strive for dialogue, and we stand for ethical principles. I'm joined by my co-founder and 2020 NASW Social Worker of the Year, Xander Kaig, as well as Dr. Nafisa Lam, our senior scholar, and Michelle Linford, our MSW intern. And we're also joined by Dr. Michael Eichler. He is the co-founder of the Consensus Organizing Model, and we're excited to have a discussion with him. He was an instructor of Xander's in graduate school, so we'll turn the time to Xander to introduce Dr. Eichler.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, it's definitely an honor and a privilege to be able to, even all these years later, I graduated my MSW program in 2012, and here we are in 2026. And this isn't the first time that I've seen Professor Eichler since I've graduated. We've thankfully stayed in touch, and I've had the distinct honor and privilege of being able to see some of his plays. He's a playwright, so maybe he'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of our time together. Let me do just a brief bio, and this bio is going to be focusing on Professor Eichler's experience around organizing. I did mention he's a playwright, but that's not going to factor into the bio. So let me go ahead and start. Mike Eichler has more than 20 years of experience working as a community organizer and created the method of consensus organizing. He has worked with unemployed steelworkers, casino owners, welfare recipients, bankers, corporate executives, and the unhoused, bringing them together around common self-interest. Mike began his organizing career in Pittsburg, Pennsylvania, where he helped a neighborhood battle the illegal practices of racial steering and blockbusting by joining forces with a for-profit real estate firm. When hired by Pittsburgh executives to help address economic problems caused by the closing of steel mills, he brought the unemployed and business leaders together to begin the revitalization of the region. Following that success, he was asked by the Local Initiative Support Corporation, or LISC, to expand his work throughout the country. He organized new grassroots efforts in diverse cities such as West Palm Beach, Florida, New Orleans, Louisiana, Las Vegas, Nevada, and Houston, Texas. In 1999, he joined academia, where he said he would never be heard from again. Again, welcome to Pro Social Workers, Professor Eichler, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation today.
Thank you, Xander. Thanks a lot. And I do want to just state that this is especially nice to get an introduction from Xander because I was a tough marker and I don't think he ever got an A from me. So it's nice you still have a good relationship with me.
Absolutely. I'm not an A student. I never expected A's.
Thanks. Well, I wanted to thank everybody for the opportunity. It's great to get a chance to talk to you, and I'm going to take you back in time to my neighborhood where I grew up, which was Buffalo, New York, on the east side. If you know anything about Buffalo, that was the part of town you didn't want to be from. So it was working class to poor neighborhood. I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic school, and my parish, Holy Name of Jesus Parish on the east side of Buffalo, was one of the congregations that was members of an organization called the Industrial Areas Foundation, which was a community organizing program set up by Saul Alinsky. And Saul Alinsky remains to this day the most famous community organizer in the history of community organizing. His approach is used by 98%, 99% of community organizers to this day. He was most popular at his peak in the 60s and 70s, and our parish was a member of one of his efforts. So the way Alinsky worked, and the way most community organizers work, is they use what's called a conflict approach. Their goal is to create conflict between the oppressed, in this case would be the members of my neighborhood, versus the power structure, of which in many times is the government, the corporations, the banks, etc. And the way this is done is to get people involved in the emotion of anger, to fan people's flames, to get them as angry as possible, and to collectively turn them into a force that then attacks the target. And that's what Alinsky would call it, the target. So the target could be anything that was causing and would be blamed for the problems in the neighborhood. And once the target was identified, you would personalize the target. So the target was never the economic system of the United States, because you can't get people really mad at that, but you can get mad at John Smith, the CEO of the bank. So John Smith would be the target personally. And so I watched these tactics in my own parish as a boy, 12, 13, 14 years old. And I saw some progress made in the neighborhood, and I was fascinated by the people that did the organizing. I got a chance to meet Alinsky himself, which if you were a psychotherapist, it'd be like meeting Sigmund Freud. And we hit it off pretty well. And I wanted to be a community organizer when I left school. So I enrolled at the time in what was called Vista. I guess the equivalent now would be AmeriCorps. And you volunteer instead of going overseas to a foreign country to do work. You would stay in a city in the United States. And I got assigned to Pittsburg, and I got assigned to a neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And the neighborhood in Pittsburgh was very similar to the east side of Buffalo. So I felt very comfortable there. And so I thought, okay, now I got to find the issue, got to get people mad, got to find the target, got to personalize the target. So it was relatively easy to do this because the neighborhood was undergoing a very serious problem, which occurred in many neighborhoods at that time. And it still does to this day. And it's a process where real estate companies use a series, kind of like a 1-2 punch in boxing, 2 different tactics to make a lot of money in a short period of time. The first tactic is what's called racial steering, which means that the agents in an agency, real estate agency, would be told to steer one racial group of buyers into a neighborhood and steer the other group of a different race to another neighborhood. So not to make this too complicated, it meant that in Perry Hilltop, which was an integrated neighborhood at the time, about 60% white, 40% black, that neighborhood would only be shown to black people. And if anybody white would come and look at the neighborhood, they would be encouraged to move to a different neighborhood and not to Perry Hilltop. Now, why would an agent do that? They would do that because they deal in volume. They make the more money, the more houses they sell, the more money they make. If they're totally unscrupulous and only interested in the maximum profit in the shortest period of time, they try to create a racial panic in the neighborhood. And you do that by making it appear and in reality, making it happen, that the neighborhood becomes, in this case, integrated to all black. And as that happens, originally, ironically, the property values in that neighborhood go up for a very short period of time. Why do they go up? Because there's a lot of buyers being shown the property for the very first time. It could have been a neighborhood or prior to it, blacks weren't shown any houses. So you can get volume, a lot of houses sold in a very short period of time where the prices go up. But then when you have 75 houses for sale on one block, the prices go down because people say, why in heaven's name are there 75 houses available on one block? So it's kind of like strip mining and coal. You make a lot of money in a short period of time, and then the neighborhood becomes decimated after this process is over. So that first punch was happening in Perry Hilltop. So maybe I'm a bit ashamed to admit this, but for me, that was very good because it created a problem where you could find a target. It made a lot of people angry. You could personalize the target. So what I did, it's difficult working to this day on any issue that's racial in the United States. You have to be very careful in that this neighborhood was pro-integration. Nobody wanted it to be segregated. They were very comfortable in an integrated neighborhood. So I wanted to get black and white homeowners in the neighborhood angry at the same time, angry for the same reason. And I think you could understand you would want to divide up the two races with different approaches. You have to bring them together. So the way I did that is I found volunteers, black and white, from the neighborhood who would pose as if they were buying real estate with the real estate agent we were targeting. So a couple, the Smith family might be white. They were told that they would call the real estate company at 9:00 in the morning, ask for the same agent, and tell the agent that they had $10,000 saved, they wanted a 2-bedroom house, etc. And then an hour later, a white volunteer couple matched a black volunteer couple. They would have $10,000 saved. They would want a 2-bedroom house. And they would call the agent on the same day. Now, if the agent wasn't racial steering, what they would have done was show them the same houses, right? They had the same income, same savings, wanted the same type of house. Wouldn't they be shown the same houses? Yes. But because of racial steering, I knew they would say one thing to the black family and one thing to the white family. Now, remember, these are real families that lived in the neighborhood. They were just posing as if they didn't. They were posing as if they were looking for property. So at 10:00, the white Smith family would go in and they were told to go out to the suburbs to look for a house. And they were trained by me to say, well, that's fine, but I'd like to see some houses in Perry Hilltop. And what did the agent say? You don't want to move there. That's dangerous. The schools are terrible. You're going to lose all your investment money. You'll never have any money for your children. There'll be no equity in the property. Trust me. An hour later, the Jones family, black, with the same savings, same desires, same hopes, same credit rating, comes in. And they're told, got 3 lovely properties to show you in Perry Hilltop. And they were trained to say, that's nice, but I'd like to see some houses in the suburbs. And they were told, there's nothing you can afford. So now you have the families come back. They tell their story to each other. Is everybody angry? Yes. Are they angry at the same person? Yes. Do they want to work together to solve the problem? Yes. So yours truly would do this, I think, about 200 times. 200 couples over a 3-month period. Now all brought into the church to talk about. You were told what? I wasn't told that. What? And they all had the same experience. So 2 weeks later, 12 buses rented by my community group appeared at the church at the worship services of the broker of the real estate company, Frank Thackeray. May he rest in peace. So at Frank Thackeray's church, with Frank Thackeray and Mrs. Thackeray in the pew, 500 people from Perry Hilltop entered the church with cameras rolling, pushed the minister off to the side, took over the microphone and said into the microphone, you think Jesus would do what Frank Thackeray does to us? Let me tell you what he did. With him sitting there with his family. Front page news in the newspapers, covered by all 3 networks in Pittsburgh. Seems Frank wanted to have a meeting the next day to iron out whatever differences we had, and left with his tail between his legs, selling no houses in Perry Hilltop, promising that this is over. A victory for the community group. So the podcast would end here if that was the kind of community organizing approach we're talking about. But as luck would have it, about 6-7 months later, I decided to go back down, and this is long before information was easy to gather. So if you wanted to find out about real estate sales, you had to get on a bus, go to the city county building, look through the index files, and find the number of sales that the Thackeray company had made. And the reason I was doing this is I wanted to dramatically show the community volunteers what a great victory they had achieved. So as I looked through the index files, I found that Frank Thackeray's business had tripled. Not in Perry Hilltop. We drove him out of our neighborhood. But he was blockbusting other neighborhoods in Pittsburgh. And how was he doing that? Because people saw the newscast. They saw the negative coverage that we had in the paper. And if they lived in an all-white neighborhood, they said, now that's the company we want to do business with. They steered blacks out of our neighborhood. So not only did we increase his business, we increased his business in neighborhoods with higher value property, with higher commissions. He was selling houses in upper middle class, all white neighborhoods in Pittsburgh because they loved the fact that he was blockbusting in Berry Hill. Now, that was my crisis moment as a community organizer, because what was I to do? My community group was happy. My community group was rejoicing in the victory. I didn't have to tell them this is what I found, but I also have to sleep at night. So I went back and I told the community group, look, this is what I found. We drove him out of the neighborhood, but he's making more money now. And I didn't know how they would react. See, we're always told that everybody's self-serving and, what do they care if there's a problem somewhere else? I was proud years later to look back at this, because every single member, white and black, of the community group said, we can't let him get away with this. It's terrible. He did that. We put money in his pocket. This is terrible. We have to stop it. How can we stop it? So the problem with me as a community organizer at that point is I had used the bullets in my gun, right? I had gotten people angry. I had driven them out of the neighborhood. That's all I know how to do. I don't know how to use any other approach. So I went back and looked at the issue, sat in my basement apartment on my $125 government monthly grant. And I sat there and said, where's the power here? The power really wasn't with the community group. Not really. The power was really in the real estate industry. If they did everything right, if they did everything ethically over the entire city, we wouldn't have this problem. We would have stable, integrated neighborhoods. They're the ones making the money. They have the power. They're the ones doing the manipulation. Yeah, we can drive them out of one neighborhood, but that's like, a finger in the dike as the ball bursts. So I went back to the community group and I told them, look, the power is in the real estate business. Maybe we have to look at this differently. So we began to look at real estate law, which I knew nothing about. I didn't know how somebody became an agent. I didn't know how you operated a company. I didn't know about the licensing. I only knew they were bad. They were the target. They were the people we drove out. So digging up information, I found a lot of good news, basically. This is a working class neighborhood, very few people with college degrees, but you don't need a college degree to be a licensed real estate agent. It's not required. That's good. You don't have to spend thousands of dollars to get the license. It's at the time $150 to take the course and then take the standardized test. The trouble was, a broker has to sponsor the efforts, and a broker has a license that requires him or her to be an agent for 3 years prior to being the broker. So you can't go from nothing to running your own company. You can go from nothing to working for somebody that runs the company. So if we were going to get involved in trying to have power with the real estate operations in our neighborhood, we would have to form a partnership with somebody that had the broker's license. And I remember thinking at the time, well, that's bad. See, the ideology of the community organizer, partnership. They're going to take over. They're going to they're not going to give us anything. They won't want to work with us. You're not really trained to look for partnerships. You're trained to distrust them. You're trained to be very wary of them. You're trained to not sell out. And that's what a partnership is seen as. It's selling out. So I went back and approached the community group and I said, yeah, we have good news and bad news. The good news is, doesn't cost a lot of money. You don't have to go to college. The bad news is we have to form a partnership. And every member of the group said, okay, see, it's the ideology of the community organizer, not the ideology of the people that have the problem. The people that have the problem are very practical. That's why people vote for Obama and Trump, right? In their mind, they're being practical twice. The ideology drives us crazy because we're ideological and we think people are inconsistent. They're not inconsistent. Once you figure out how they think, they're very consistent. So in this case, practicality was required. So we said, well, which broker do you want to talk to? And they picked the biggest company, the one that had the ads on the buses, the one who had the hour program on Sunday on television, the most prestige. That made sense to me. So we had a proposal. We went to the company, and now we're going to the company, not pretending we're somebody that we're not. See the difference? First time around, we're going to trick them. This time around, no, this is who we are. This is what we want to do. So our proposal to the company was we wanted them to open an office in our neighborhood, physical office, because that would show a commitment to the community. You're not blockbusting it and then spending money in it and becoming part of it. We wanted the sale of any property that the office would make to come to the portion of it to come to the community group in a form of a charitable contribution so that we would be able to further improve the neighborhood as we sell houses. We wanted to buy a property that we would own, not the broker, that we would own, rent out the top 2 floors to low income people so we'd be able to create housing while we put the real estate office on the first floor. And in return for that, we would give them a number of dedicated people, dedicated volunteers that wanted to become real estate agents that would study really hard, become licensed, and we would encourage everyone to do business with that company. And we had contacts in the neighborhood. We know all the business owners. We knew all the crossing guards at school. We knew all the funeral directors. These are important people to know in the real estate business, right? Somebody dies, the house goes up for sale. The funeral director is a member of the Perry Hilltop Citizens Council. He's going to tell everybody to do business with this company. So we figured the broker maybe will understand that, will present. So we'd have a relatively short program today if that worked, but here's what happened. I'm anxious. I'm nervous. I'm doing something totally against my training. I'm flying by the seat of my pants. We go in, they make the presentation. They did very well, made a lot of sense. They did great. And he said, and this is exactly what he said, this is a great idea. Has a lot of potential, good public relations, and we could make some money, be innovative, kind of thing our company could benefit a lot from, and you could benefit a lot from. But we don't want to do it now. We want to do it in maybe 3 or 4 years. What do you say? And we're totally puzzled. I'm totally puzzled. It's a great idea. We're doing a great job, but you don't want to do it now. You want to wait 3 years. Why? So the great thing about dealing with community volunteers is at a time like this, they say, why, instead of, beating around the bush. Why? Why? Actually, the quote was, why the hell do we want to wait 3 years? And he said, well, first, we want the neighborhood to be completely blockbusted, to become all black. And after it's all black, you people can help us gentrify it by making it all white. Property values drop, panic occurs. Now the property's dirt cheap, but it has good bones, has a lot of architectural ability, close to downtown. And then the white people come in and then it goes back up again. He tells them. Now at the time, being new to all of this, I was devastated. I thought, I better get a new career because, this is not working. So we come back and we have a strategy meeting, and the one relatively big guy, truck driver type guy, just hit me really hard, like in the shoulder. And he said, what the F is wrong with you? Let's just go to another company. See, they were resilient. It's like, we got the wrong guy. We don't have the wrong approach. We got the wrong guy. Now, what did I learn from that? 2 things. First is, why did he tell them the truth? See, I'd worked in low income communities for a while, and this is what you hear all the time. We stand ready to help you, wonderful people. We just don't have the resources now. We can't get the swimming pool into your community because, we only have X number tax dollars, but we'd love to help you. It's always these people wanting to help you and just unable to, right? That's how low income people are treated all the time. They're at the bottom. They're not treated fairly. And the people with resources are always acting like they want to help them. This guy didn't do that. Why did he tell them the truth? And I realized he told them the truth because we told him the truth. See how the relationship was built? It wasn't built that we pretended we were this to trick you into this. We said, here's the deal. You want to do it? We were like on the golf course with this guy, like on the 12th hole, pitching him something. No, Jimmy, I don't really want to do that yet. I want to do it in 3 years after it gets all black. That's the way they talk on the golf course with their friends. So we were able to get them to talk like that to us. And I realized that was smart. Even if the information was decimating, it was better than the way they were treated by people who wanted to help, because it's an honest relationship. So number one, I realized that they were told the truth, and the truth was not debilitating. The truth was motivating. As bad as it might be, it was truthful, so it was motivating. So one is they set up an atmosphere where we told the truth, and then they processed the truth in a way that motivated them. Now I was getting excited. That was very exciting to me. It was like, this is really interesting because it's not working the way it's supposed to. It got, very interesting. So we go to the second company, smaller, 1 office, 3 agents. They make the exact same presentation. He's got a yellow pad, and I was sitting next to him. On the legal pad, he's writing. And at the bottom, it had all the expenses, advertising, rent. And he had plus thing at the bottom, meaning he was going to make a profit. He said, yeah, I'll do it. Put the office in the neighborhood immediately. We bought the building, fixed it up. 4 candidates take the test. In Pennsylvania, the average percentage when you take the standardized REALA test, the people that pass the first time is around 24%. Lawyers take it and they don't take it seriously, and they have to take it twice because they didn't go to class. But these people, every week studied together. Community group would bake them cakes. We know you can do it. So all 4 pass first time. 1 GED, didn't from high school, GED. All passed the first time. So what does that do to the real estate guy? He's like, wow, I go in the inner city, I get 4 for 4. I'm out in the suburbs, I get 1 for 4. This is interesting to me. So see, he's interested. Now these things start happening that make everybody in the partnership more interested in working together because it's surprising and in a good way. And people get attracted when you create something that's surprising to them because it's a powerful motivation. So they passed the test. Open up the office. The office made a profit the first year, which is, very unusual for any business. Doubled its profits the second year, and then doubled its profits the third year. In the third year, we had at the end of our neighborhood 24 row houses that had been vacant, open, and vandalized for a decade. And they were all owned by the city. And as community activists, every year we went and demanded from the city that they do something to these derelict buildings with drug addicts in them, et cetera. Yeah, we stand ready to help you, but we just don't have the resources now, 10 years of that. Now we go as licensed real estate agents and tell them, there's a market for these if they're renovated, but you have to sell them, for $0, get them back on the tax. Okay, sure. Why? Because we're licensed real estate agents. We must know what we're talking about. We didn't know what we were talking about. So what I realized was we were previously branded as not knowing what we're talking about, even if we did. And now we're branded as knowing what we're talking about, even if we don't. That's interesting because you just see the shift in the power, like, wow, people are believing us automatically. So 24 places got renovated. We sold them all in one day, 24. You think the real estate company was happy with that? So the broker after that comes up to me and says, hey, Mike, are there any of these community groups in any other parts of Pittsburgh? He's looking to form, more partnerships. So we did. We had 2 other neighborhoods, did the exact same thing we're talking about today. My job was to find the agents and build the partnership and everything. And all that, worked out very well. About 10 or 15 years later, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the daily paper, did a 3-part series on race relations in Pittsburgh. And they went to different neighborhoods and it was a lengthy investigative piece. And they said the one neighborhood in Pittsburgh that had unbelievably close relationships across racial lines was Perry Hilltop, that people actually had friendships there. The kids actually did go to school together. They did go to baseball games together. They actually became friends. And, it wasn't just the real estate company idea that did that, but it had a lot to do with it because it stabilized the neighborhood. I went back to Pittsburgh because I had a play there a couple of months ago, and I met with a guy that was my boss at Perry Hilltop Citizens Council. He ended up being a 4-term mayor of Pittsburgh. So he did pretty well with the image he was able to build with this is how I work in Pittsburgh. This is how I bring people together. He parlayed that into, think about this, 4-term mayor of a major city. Nobody does that. You're automatically unpopular the day you're elected, and then you get less popular every month, no matter how good you do. 4 terms. So I'm meeting with him and we're talking about this, and he lives in the same house in Perry Hilltop. He never moved after his career was over, never moved. And this is not a fancy place, to live. So what's the racial composition of Perry Hilltop now? 60% white, 40% black. It's stable. It's never changed as long as you treated everybody the same way. So what that did, just to wrap up, what that did is it made me feel that, like I said, I was on to something. This approach was different. So sure enough, a couple of months after the office was open, we began to get calls and complaints from people that were trying to borrow money from banks, and they were turned down. So of course, because they lived in Perry Hilltop, they assumed the reason they were being turned down was because they live in Perry Hilltop. That was, what you would think. So what did we do as a very first step? We didn't trick the bank into thinking we weren't from Perry Hilltop. We just went to the bank and said, look, we have people that are trying to get like a furnace breaks down in the winter and they have to replace the furnace immediately. You can't wait till spring. You got to have heat in the house. And they're working class people. They have very little savings. So that they don't have whatever a furnace costs then to just buy it. So they would go to the bank and try to borrow the money and the bank would turn them down. So the banker said, Well, that's because that's like a $1,200 loan. We don't want to make loans that small. You think it's because you're from Perry Hilltop. No, somebody could come in from the richest neighborhood in the city. If they want that loan that small, we don't give it to them. We can't make enough profit. We want to make bigger loans. So we said, but these are the size loans we need. We don't want to borrow more money. Well, we don't do that. So I looked around, found out there were things called community development credit unions chartered by either the state or the federal government. They can be run by nonprofit community groups. And if the neighborhood is low income, they can take into the credit union what are called non-member deposits. That's a deposit from anybody. So if Perry Hilltop had one of these, they could go to Xander and say, look, we open a credit union. You want to put a deposit in? He could deposit $500 in it to help the group. He's paid a dividend on his money. It's insured by the government. If they blow it, give the money away or whatever, he gets all his money back. He has no risk and he gets a small dividend on his money. Why wouldn't he put money in it? So lots of people did that, including major corporations, banks. I know you don't have to make the small loan, but you do need to make a deposit into our credit union, which of course they all did. So that became a successful project and just happened to be in a building immediately next to the real estate office. So if you moved up to Pittsburgh because your job changed or whatever, you could buy a house through the real estate company, go across next door. And if you needed a refrigerator, stove, a washer and dryer, you get the loan for that at a fraction of what the bank would have charged you because you're now a resident of Perry Hilltop. So that gave the neighborhood and the future mayor a base for being successful. And what it did for me is it made me interested in continuing working as a community organizer, but doing it in a way that would be completely different than the way I was trained. So in order to move on, I had to give it a name, right? You can't say, I'm an organizer. I do something differently. It's not good marketing in the United States. So conflict was what the other organizing approach was. So I just thought, well, this is not that. It's consensus. So it's now just referred to as consensus organizing, consensus community organizing. And it's practiced in different cities. People are trained to do this. The University of Pittsburgh, my alma mater, where I went to school and got my MSW. There, 90% of the students that go into the MSW program become therapists, but the 10% that want to go into community work are trained in consensus organizing. There's courses in it when they come to school there. So it's practiced and people know about it, but it's still a very tiny portion of the approach. So what are the elements in the approach? Well, it's not that complicated, but it requires a lot of strategy and a lot of effort, but I wouldn't call it complicated. You're basically starting out by looking for who are the players, the partners, the organizations that are affected one way or another by the issue you want to address. Who are they? It doesn't make any difference if they're helping, hurting, neutral, oblivious. Who are the people, the organizations that could be affected by the issue? And you really want a comprehensive list. You don't want everybody who voted for Bernie Sanders, right? That's not how this works. There's no litmus test on politics. You actually want to have a cross-section of people who vote for different people. I would say that's even essential to make it work. So you don't want to wear the litmus test of what's the person's politics or what's the person's attitude toward a social issue. It's really totally irrelevant, but you're looking for people who are affected by it. And that's the basis for what could develop into common self-interest. And that's what you're ending up looking for. You're looking for something where a cross-section of people and organizations are affected by something and might actually all benefit by working together. I would argue in any other profession, that's the way people think. That's how easy this is to conceptualize. If we were all architects, right? We just all decide, I don't know anything about architecture, but let's say we all decided to be architects. I guarantee you that we would think like this in our architecture career. We wouldn't say, I'm an architect. I don't want to build a building over there because I don't like, the way they think about this issue. It would be, no, they've hired me as an architect and they're listening to what I'm saying and they like my design, right? They don't have litmus tests like this. Only community organizers and community activists have these litmus tests. If we can get away from that and just think almost open-mindedly about the situation, we're just way better off. I can tell you that in doing this, I have a list of people across the country who hate me with a passion. I've had articles about me, a magazine with me juggling in a clown suit juggling people. When I first went to work at San Diego State as a faculty member, I had put in my faculty mailbox. Every single faculty member had that article written about me put in their mailbox. It was an activist professor who believed in environmental justice. And when they found out that I actually work with polluters, then I deserve that flyer in the mailbox. So I'm saying this not to act like a martyr. I'm just saying that if you do practice this approach, it's not that everybody then says, wow, that's wonderful. That's practical. Congratulations. You will get a backlash from ideal. I've learned over the years that means, oh, this is actually good. And you have to think about that, and you have to develop a thick skin, because the vast majority of people find it refreshing, helpful. They're excited. The vast majority of people. But that minority of people are very organized and vocal, and they're the people on the internet all day. So you have to push past that. You have to believe in the principle that people are decent, that people will do things for different reasons, maybe not always for the right reason, but they will cooperate and do it. I've had partnerships just one last example has nothing to do with this, and then I'll end. Years later, Xander said in the introduction, I worked in Las Vegas. Well, that's obviously one of the most interesting places to apply this. So I'm raising money from casinos for a low-income housing project. Well, one of the big issue in Las Vegas is people move from all over the world to go there to work. You get lots of people from Central America, South America, hear about Las Vegas. They know they can get a job and they move there. So they don't know a soul there, don't have any savings. And the casino will hire them as a low-level employee and pay them relatively decent wages. But they don't have any money to get an apartment because you have to have, 2 months rent in advance and, all these rules. They don't have the savings. So these families that moved from Mexico put their family in a motel for like 2 years while they're working full time at a decent. This is ridiculous. You guys have all this money coming in at the casinos. They're your own workers, right? Wouldn't it be nice if they had a decent apartment and wouldn't worry about their kids like dangling from a motel balcony? They're going to do even better work for you. But you still got to go and talk to them. So I realized in doing this how competitive they are, right? They hate each other. So all you had to do was say, I have X number of dollars from this casino, and they would double it. And then the next one would. So is that doing things for the right reasons? No. But if I would have given them a lecture about the responsibility they have to their employees, the houses would never have been built, right? So you have to be comfortable with that. You have to be, comfortable with talking to people who in the social world, maybe you would want nothing to do with, and in your internet, your circle of people you respect, maybe they would never come close to entering it. That doesn't make any difference. The point is, are they doing something to help people who deserve and need the help? And if they are, then congratulations to you by using the model and applying it correctly. So I would say, it's very meaningful and enjoyable to apply the model. It takes a little bit of practice by trying it. I don't think there's any harm that you can do. And I know that as you practice it, you would get better and better at it. Because it really is repetitive. Once you think this way in community work, you can be dropped off a plane somewhere, go to a brand new place and kind of know in general what you need to do to help people. In that, I found a lot of satisfaction and a lot of pride. So that's my introduction to consensus organizing.
Well, thank you. That's fascinating. Sounds like great work, great experience that you've had. And we appreciate you sharing that. And just have a few questions or maybe thoughts to share in response to that. Xander, Michelle, Nafis, do you have anything you'd like to ask?
Well, I wanted to say that, in my MSW program, we only had 3 electives. And so I took all 3 of my electives in the consensus organizing, courses. And all these years, right? It's like, I'm not a community organizer, but I use these principles in the work that I do, in the bridge building work that I do with Braver Angels, and the work that we're doing at Pro Social Workers, and the work that I've done with the Pro Human Foundation, right? These basic principles are not only applicable to community organizing, right? They're applicable to bridge building. They're applicable to increasing relationships in families, right? There's when we're being told that the best thing we can do is become estranged from our family if they voted for somebody, that isn't going to work, right? It's that short-term kind of strategy strategy. And so with the consensus model, it has longer term impact, and it does make sense. It is very practical. It is popular once people understand it and they go, oh yeah, isn't that just how things are done? You know? So I just really appreciate that I was able to learn that, because I was trained also as a conflict organizer. That's the work I did for a couple of decades. You know, I went through the program in my 40s. So I've heard these stories before, and I love hearing them over and over again because they're just inspiring. And I'm just really glad that we were able to have you tell these stories to us so that we can then share them with other people. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Xander. And it's a really good point you made. Practicing consensus organizing doesn't require you to have a career in organizing. It's just really true. As you do this for a while, you'll spot somebody, in any profession, and you go, whoa, there's somebody that really understands consensus organizing. They'll stand out, and it could be in any profession. Doctor, a medical doctor. It's just that because that medical doctor will be completely different if they use these principles. They'll come across as, wow, I really like that doctor. And it shouldn't be seen as just an argument about what you do as a professional organizer. So thanks for bringing it.
I mean, when I think about it, these are, to use our language, pro-social principles. And when you align with principles like at that core, I like to think of a tree. If the roots are healthy, the fruit comes. And if conflict is your root, the fruits aren't going to follow, because it doesn't follow our social work principle of the importance of human relationships and dignity of all. And this model, these principles really bring those things to the forefront, and they just have a power all their own. And I could listen to you talk all day.
Well, my wife, I wish, was here to hear you say that, but thank you.
Yeah, you've been very brave in taking on this topic. I mean, the racial tensions and housing, most researchers would stay away just because it causes a lot of friction. And I think we need more brave researchers like yourself.
And brave practitioners.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I just to segue into the theater part of my life, theater is filled with symbolic actions to prove how liberal and open-minded people are. And that happens now to a fault. I just want to give you an example. It's correcting a problem where the profession was not open and not representative and all that, but it's overcorrected to, here's the world that I now live in. There's a theater not far from you, Xander, in Portland, and it's very well respected. And I'm a member of the Dramatists Guild. That's kind of like a union for writers, but not a union. And you get a card, and if you're in a city, they have extra tickets, and you're a member of the Dramatists Guild, give you a ticket for free. So I'm in Portland. There's a show I want to see, and I call. It's on the phone, and I say, I'm a playwright. I'm a member of the Dramatists Guild. I'd like to see the show. If you have any openings, it'd be wonderful. And they say, yes, you could come on Wednesday or Thursday night to the performances. I said, I'd like to come Wednesday. And they said, well, Wednesday is LGBTQ night. I said, uh-huh. They said, we recommend you come on Thursday. That's the now response to being open in theater. It's just not healthy. And back to Nafis, your point about, well, what do you do? Speak up about that? It's yes. It's the point would be you want everybody that night to be in the theater and feel comfortable. That's the point of it. They're telling me not to come.
That doesn't make sense from a business point of view. That does not make sense.
Well, that's what I was going to say, Michelle. Thank you.
But again, the politics are such in that profession that everything is a litmus test. Everything is a litmus test. And you have people walking on pins and needles, afraid to open up. I have another example would be there's a theater, lots of theaters are interested, run by all female staff, want plays about females. Great. So I sent him a play that I wrote with all females. Wouldn't read it. That's not how we're going to bring people together. Now, reading it and saying, be a lot better if it was written by a woman, this one's not good enough, that's fine, but won't read it because of it. So this division of people isn't just happening by the Trump administration. It's happening by everybody. Everybody is isolating themselves from each other. And this model is arguing that that's a big mistake. It's going in the wrong direction. And this model was proliferated long before the politics are what they are now. But I never would have thought, just editorializing, that I'd see a retreat from inclusiveness by the people who supposedly always believed in inclusiveness. I never thought I would see that. And it's kind of sad. It's really sad. So the point earlier about don't just use this method as an organizer, but use it in whatever profession you're in couldn't be more important to accentuate, because we really need everybody to start looking at what does it take to bring people together, not let's make Wednesday night the night only for, it doesn't make any sense.
One of the things that we do within pro-social workers is counterpoint our own arguments to kind of share a different perspective. And you've done that to some degree by highlighting that this is not a walk in the park. There are some challenges and they come when you're dealing with different ideologies or people who may be ideologically captured or converted, if you will. My question might be then is what might be the counter argument for consensus organizing?
That's a very good point, Matt. I got a story, of course, to tell you about that. I worked in right outside Pittsburgh later after Perry Hilltop in the area it's called the Mon Valley, the Monongahela Valley, where all the steel mills have closed. And that's like a 2-hour story about how that was put together. But the point is, as a group of community people formed an organization to revitalize the community, we were looking to create a loan fund with a lot of money from banks to start up new businesses. And we wanted community people to control the loan fund. So there were 4 large banks in Pittsburgh, and we wanted a deposit from all 4 of the banks. And we went to three of the 4 banks made a deposit. The 4th bank would not do it. Just wouldn't do it. And I said, it's in it's in your self-interest. Everyone, he wouldn't do it. I got other people and new people at the bank who knew the CEO, didn't care. He wouldn't do it. Now, at that point, it's not working, right? The approach is not working because you want all the banks to make, and he won't do it, even when it's in his self-interest. So here's where having the conflict training before the consensus training, am I going to use it or not, right? So what I did is I talked to our staff and got them to agree. We called up all the media in Pittsburgh and we told them this bank that not making the loan was Pittsburgh National Bank. The CEO was Ned Randall. We called all the media and said, Ned Randall's going to make an announcement about the deposit he's making in our loan fund at his bank at 10 o'clock on Tuesday. Be there. He wasn't having a press conference. He didn't want to put any deposit in it. There was 75 people from the media there asking, where's the press conference at his office on Monday? He had 2 choices, make the deposit or say, I have no interest in making the deposit. He made the deposit. Now, there's an example where even when I was using consensus organizing, when it didn't work, you have to be flexible. You cannot say, well, now, because then you're just as ideological as everybody else. You have to realize sometimes it won't work. I worked in Northern Ireland, in Belfast, before the peace accord. And I had to go to the Protestant and Catholic neighborhoods, working class neighborhoods where all the violence was. And I did everything I could to sell this community organizing method of consensus in Belfast. I couldn't do it. The timing was off. 3 years later, it ended up coming around to what it needed to be. There were women's groups in both the Protestant and Catholic neighborhoods that were wonderful. They had done work to help their communities, but they were open to collaboration. But none of the men and the men's organization would do it at all. It didn't make any difference how I talked. It didn't make any difference who talked to them. So if you go back and you look at all the work that George Mitchell did later, almost all the leaders were women. But I was there 3 or 4 years too early. I couldn't do it. So I just tell you those 2 stories because it doesn't always work. Sometimes you just have to quit, like I had to do in Northern Ireland. I couldn't come up with an alternative. And sometimes, like in the Mon Valley, I was able to push it in such a way that it still happened. But you have to be prepared for both. It's not going to be 100% track record, and it won't necessarily be some shortcoming of yours by trying it. The timing can be off. A lot of this is timing. I would argue the timing for consensus organizing now, because of the politics, is very good. I would say if I was 25 now, I'd be very busy. I mean, and other people would be too, because really this approach would work in a lot of businesses. Because it would be so refreshing. People would be happy for the first time in years. They would look forward to going to talk to somebody for the first time in years. And that would be exhilarating, So a lot of it's timing, and sometimes the timing is off, and when it's off, the model won't work.
Great. So timing and sequencing, like now is a good time for this. If you wanted, if one of our listeners or constituents wanted to be involved in community organizing, where could they go, or where could someone find a career in community organizing nowadays when so much is kind of focused on the micro in social work practice?
It's very decentralized, Matt. So in other words, there's not a clearinghouse for there's nothing like that at all. It's very, very decentralized. To me, it would be more a matter of encouraging people to understand the principles of it, to practice it maybe as a volunteer, and then to look at any job opening in such a way that those skills might apply, and not look at it as where can I go to become an organizer. Because I think, to be honest with you, right now, still to this day, if you said, where can I go to be an organizer, you're going to be taken to the same organizations that have been around since the 60s that are very conflict oriented. They're not going to really give you any place else. And it's going to be very frustrating for a lot of young people to realize that's the only option they have. So I think it's much better to tell people, look, you just learn these principles, study these principles, and then be very aware of whatever job opening there is out there, and where are people coming from, and could you apply these skills and principles in that particular job?
Well, we were seeking to collaborate and find others with shared interests, but we had some discussions about doing a course or several courses on this so the pro-social workers can promote those principles in the practice.
Well, that would be great. No, and there's a big need for it. And I think, I admire what you're doing, and adding that or accentuating that focus, I think would be very helpful to the field.
Great. Well, your protege is there for you.
I had to turn off my video because my computer is struggling with the uploads. Can be providing some CE support for social workers to learn about it as well. But because we offer our videos for free, then others who are interested, I associate with a lot of people in social impact and in other spaces. And there are a lot of really good things happening in community organizing spaces that I think are trying to do things differently. And I'm thrilled to be able to point them to what you've done. So may I ask my counterpoint question? All right, so the Las Vegas example.
Yeah.
I could make a social change. One of them would be to have gambling not be a thing, because it causes so many people, often already the most destitute, a lot of problems. So how do we wrestle with a system like that where, of course, people are already coming, right? So it's not like you're making them come, but then we're also keeping an industry alive that is hurting the very people that we're trying to help. What are your thoughts on that tension?
Well, it's a real tension. I was shocked, actually, at how, relatively speaking, valuable the jobs actually were. There is a very strong union that for 90% of the hotels and strip in downtown that they're members of, and they have excellent health benefits, and the salaries are pretty good. So it was relatively speaking, for the other opportunities people had for jobs, these jobs actually were pretty good. But you do have to block out the real negative impact of gambling. I just have always been able to do that, and some people can't. And I don't think it's a weakness if you can't. There are some places that maybe would touch the buttons that an individual has, that what potential partner is doing is so negative on other measurements that you can't, see past it or justify it. I understand that. I wouldn't belittle anybody that felt that way. I have, in my family situation, my brother was upper middle class chemist, lost his house through gambling completely. I had to know that while I was talking to the casino owners. So I, saw that personally in my own family. It's a personal thing. Some people are able to do it in 90% of the situations, and there may be a potential partner or a line they can't cross, which I would respect. I can rationalize good coming out of almost anything, and some people have more trouble with it. There have been a couple people in my career I couldn't work with. They were just too despicable. I just couldn't do it. But I would say it's a very small percentage. And I would think people would want to work to keep it as a small percentage and not expect it to be zero. Yeah. Well, just one quick story on that. To always try to look at where things might go if you're willing to stretch yourself a little. When I worked in Florida, there was a banker that was involved, and he worked in a relatively small bank, and he was on a committee with regular people from the community. And one of the people from the community ran a little store in the neighborhood, a little deli, and they got to know each other, sit next to each other in meetings. So the banker comes in and he tells the banker was white and the store owner was black. And the banker comes in and he says, I lost my job. And the guy from the store says, what? He's thinking, how would a guy like that lose his job? I'm the kind of person that loses the job. He doesn't lose his job. And he said, yeah, another bank came in. They bought our bank. They already have a trust division. That's what I work in. They don't need 7 trust guys. So that's it for me. And the guy from the store is like, what? He couldn't believe like somebody like that was treated that way. Like what? You're a big shot. You wear a suit to the meetings. You make a lot of money. You live in you're fired. They just did away with you. And he goes, yeah, that's what happens in banks. And so the black guy says, well, wait a minute. I'm on the Community Reinvestment Committee for Palm Beach County, run by the government. And all the banks, they have to go to those meetings. I could put in a good word for you. And the banker I was at the meeting. You can see the banker catch himself. Like, I'm at a point where this guy is going to put in a good word for me. It's a little embarrassing, but then he realizes I need somebody to put in a good word for me. So he catches himself and goes, well, Willie, thanks. Thanks. But I could tell he didn't think it was going to get anywhere, but he did catch himself and thank him. A month later, the guy comes in and the banker's beaming. He got a job from another bank because Willie put in a word for him. So that's not the end of the story. So he's now in the Community Reinvestment Division, the banker. So Willie goes, we need money for our project. And he gets so if you started out with, I can't work with these bankers, it's just, I can't tell you how fulfilling that was to reverse who helped who and then have it turn around. So they're both helped. It's like, that's the way things are done among people with resources in our country. Like, that's what they do every day.
Yeah.
They tap their network to help them out of a hole, and then they help the guy back, and that's how it works. But you don't see that across races and across income. But when you do, it's very fulfilling. So every time I'm having some difficulty with somebody I have to deal with, I used to remember stories like that, and it would keep you a little more open-minded, I guess is what I'm saying. I have a play written set in Pittsburgh where it's a Polish family in a real neighborhood in Pittsburgh, South Side, and they own a bar, and the parents die in a car crash, and it's now the adult son and daughter own the bar, but it's a working class bar, and ex-steel workers that retired 30 years ago go in it. It's horrible. They don't make any money. The parents never made any money. And the brother and sister go, we don't know how to do this. And the brother says, you know what we should do? We should sell it. There's people moving into Pittsburgh from California, from New York, and they think it's cool to live here. We can make a lot of money. So not only did I get to write this play, I get to make fun of people from Southern California where I live now, and I get to make fun of people in New York where I have to do a lot of my work for theater. So there's a couple come in, look at the house. They're from California, and they have flip-flops on, and they're cold. And then the people come in from New York, and they're making fun of what a hick town Pittsburgh is. Anyway, they compete to buy the property, and they sell the property, and then the brother gets seller's remorse. He's like, they've sold the house, but the neighborhood's being gentrified. Issues I used to work on as an organizer is in the play. And the brother says, what are they going to do with this? And it's not going to be a bar anymore. And this is where I made my first communion. Janie, this is where you made your first communion. He's distraught. And he realized too late he sold it. So he breaks back in the bar and he sleeps there overnight. He's drinking all night. The sister comes in. Danny, you getting ready to do the stupid thing? Now, this play was produced at City Theater on the South Side. So people are watching this play, and out the door of the theater would be a bar that looks like the bar. They go to the bar that is in the play, right? And we're watching it in the theater, which is usually upper middle income, highly educated people. These are neighborhood people watching a play about their neighborhood. So Danny, the brother, says, you're going to have to leave. And she says, Danny, I've known you my whole life. You're getting ready to do the stupid thing. And he says, yeah, but that's why you have to leave. And she says, no, I'm going to stay because in the end, we're the Jablonski's bar. Reaches under the bar and he's got a giant can of gasoline. He's going to burn the bar down. And he starts telling him, they have insurance. They're going to be able to build a new building here, but they're not getting what Dad had. And there are people throughout the theater crying like weeping. And he starts throwing the gasoline down. The jukebox is blaring a singing group that's only popular in Pittsburgh. No one else knows him. And he strikes the match. They light it, and the Iron City beer and sign is blinking, and you can smell the smoke, and the bar burns down. It gets a standing ovation from the crowd. So you can write plays about the same issues I was working on, but in a way that emotionally affects people, differently. So all the proceeds from that play went to the South Side Community Council. Everybody that bought a ticket, the money went back to the community group to do. So I'm having brunch with the community group, thanking me for the contribution. She says, Mike, when Jimmy's sitting there, when Jimmy read the play before they did it, he didn't like the ending. And I said, Jimmy, why don't you like the ending? He said, well, I got to know the brother and sister, and then they burned it down. And she said, Jimmy, when we went to South High School together, how many guys would have burned it down? And Jimmy said, every one of them. That's why it's been, fulfilling to be able to write this, because if you understand how communities work, you can actually write a play, which is usually written by somebody who doesn't understand anything. If you see a play with blue collar people in it, trust me, they don't understand it. They always have the language is off and it's stilted, and they always have to have actors with tattoos because that's probably what those people do. It's very fake. So to be able to go and have him say, no, we would have all burned it down if that was our family's tavern, was very, very fulfilling. So you can address these issues in ways that are different. And that's what's held my interest, dealing with a cross section of people, getting people to come to the theater that never come, that don't feel comfortable there. And then they come and they like it.
Professor Eichler, is that example you gave about that fourth bank owner and the resolution that did end up working? I have a friend who has worked with the homeless in San Francisco for about 2.5 decades and uses that kind of tactic all the time, gives credit to the mayor or gives credit to the director of this or that for things they do. And it makes me think about, it's like a hybrid of the consensus and the conflict, because it doesn't go to the point of, rushing the, to the, the podium in the church and, pointing the finger at the congregant. It's actually like, this is good news. What a gracious guy this is. What a really generous person, right? So it's kind of using both of those tactics together. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that it was very important not to embarrass the bank or declare a victory because we forced them to do it. It was all done as if the banker wanted to do it. And everything we said was very much giving him credit. Like you said, credit is free. Give credit to, everybody. But the beauty of it was set up in such a way that he would be glad he did it in the end, because that's what you really want. You don't want 2 years later for him to come back and hate you and try to screw you because of what you did to him. He doesn't have to admit it, but you want him 2 years later to say, I didn't want to do that, but it ended up being okay. That's what you want. And you have to be really careful to make sure that you get that. So we were very careful to give him a lot of credit. At this time, there were much of the power structure in Pittsburgh wanted to write off all of these towns. Like the head of U.S. Steel would say, the only reason we have Homestead, Pennsylvania is because U.S. Steel was there. U.S. Steel closed the factory. So why do we need Homestead, Pennsylvania? I mean, publicly. So if you couldn't get every bank to say, I don't believe that stuff, we're all standing behind revitalizing the economy here, it would have looked bad, because people would have said, that's the one smart bank that didn't do it. And you had to really change the impact of the way the power structure was looking at this area. So getting all the banks in this case was pretty crucial.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, for sharing your experience. It's a real joy just to hear of how these pro-social principles in practice seem to make a difference and really change communities, change lives of individuals and families. This is a pro-social effort, and what we're all about. So thank you.
Well, keep up the good work.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining and for participating, sharing your thoughts.
Sure.
All right. Take care.
Good to see you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Pro-Social Workers Podcast. We're grateful to our guests for sharing their insights, and to you, our listeners, for being part of this journey. If you'd like to earn continuing education credits, don't forget to visit our website at prosocialworkers.com, where you can register, pay a fee, complete a course evaluation, and take a quick quiz. We look forward to having you with us next time as we continue to explore how we can put the social back into social work.